I'm Dan Barahona. I'm the founder of APISec University. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but it's a site we launched about a year ago to just start throwing out free courses, training around API security. And it feels like we really hit a nerve because the site has absolutely exploded. And as I said, I'll mention more about that later. This is my co-founder, Corey Ball, the author of Hacking APIs. The reason for the QR code is, if any of you are interested in having a copy of this, there's a form there that you can fill out, and we'll send you a copy. I'll put the QR code up later, and you can decide if this presentation was worth it. So we're going to talk about API security vulnerabilities, and we got to start by setting the stage on what it is, what is the sort of reality with APIs. As we all know, APIs are sort of eating up the internet. Literally, this stat, 83% of the internet is powered by APIs. That's from Akamai. It's probably 3-4 years old, that statistic. It's probably north of 90% now, right? It's powering everything, right? Or when I book an Uber, or check flights, or make a transaction, it's all powered by APIs. You all know that. And here we go. APIs are under attack, right? We also know that, right? For years, Gartner has been predicting that APIs would be the most frequent attack vector by last year. They still stand by that. I'm not sure it's the most frequent. It's certainly the most successful, right? There are many, many, many examples of significant API breaches. And we're not doing a great job, frankly, of securing our APIs. And there's lots of good reasons why it's challenging. And in fact, I'll get to it I guess on the next slide. If we look at sort of the nature of API attacks, right? We spend a lot of time controlling what users can do at the UI level, right? We authenticate folks there. We control what data they can see, what buttons they can press, what functionality they have access to. And all that functionality is powered by APIs that then communicate with the back end. And what attackers are doing is just going right around your UI. It's very easy to watch that traffic, to identify the APIs and start calling them directly. And what they often find are APIs that are over-permissioned, return too much data, lack all those controls that you implemented in the UI, right? And that's what's leading to massive numbers of breaches. From my friend Corey Ball, most web API vulnerabilities don't get caught by our standard testing technologies, right? A cross-site scripting, fine, right? But logic flaws in your APIs, not going to get discovered through these types of tests. So I want to give you an example of what these attacks can really look like, right? And this one is pretty remarkable. It's from Coinbase. I think it was last year. And what this researcher did was they just wanted to poke around and see if they could find anything wrong with the Coinbase platform. So what do? They created an account, put some money into it, started trading. And they started watching all the traffic between the client and the back end, and they discovered this API call that was powering every transaction he was issuing. And there were these 4 parameters in there, right? What he was selling, in this case Ethereum, was he on the buy side or the sell side, source account, and a target account, right? And so like a good attacker or hacker, he wanted to throw some kind of ridiculous requests in and start seeing error codes and messages and see if it was revealing too much information. And so one of the things he tried to do was, in this source account, he actually owned Ethereum, and he actually owned 0.0243 units of Ethereum. So he did a call where he was going to sell it from this account to that account, but then he changed Ethereum to Bitcoin. He literally just changed it, said it's not Ethereum, it's Bitcoin, right? Expected that transaction to get rejected, and he would see the error message returned. But actually what returned instead was $43,000 into his account, right? It actually worked, right? Like at this point, I'm pretty sure he thought he was going to jail, right? So you could see it all on Twitter. He's like, does anyone know the CEO's email? I have a, quote, market nuking vulnerability. And Coinbase gets a lot of credit in my book. They immediately responded. They shut down the market. They reproduced it. They fixed it. And 24 hours later, it was up. He reran the transaction. Didn't work. And they blogged about it the next, I don't know, a few days later. And they said the root cause of the bug was a missing logic validation check. Okay, logic check, right? Not an injection or a cross-site or any of those sort of standard, vulnerability things. And what does that mean? Well, they were checking that he had 0.0243 of something, just not of what, right? So as long as you have 0.0243 of something, you could sell it. So that's Coinbase. This is just about a month ago, Duolingo, 2.6 million user accounts harvested. What's sort of amazing about this is the way it happened was they had an open API, and they didn't just sort of iterate and find 2.6 million. They went and downloaded known email addresses and just tried them all until they found ones that matched. So they probably tried 100x of this number to get this number of accounts. So how does that not get detected, right? Like what sort of monitoring is taking place there? And since I'm so committed to my craft, I actually hacked myself. So that's my email address up there. And this is what you could get. Like I'm not technical. I literally can do this in a browser, right? And you can see I've got a 624-day streak, so that's pretty good. I'm learning Italian, right? And what's amazing here is Duolingo's position on this, right? This has been out for a month. I ran this last night, right? Is that this is somehow legitimate use or a legitimate capability of their API and their application. Imagine what this can do for a fisher, right? Like if someone's about to hit their 100th day of a streak or 1,000th day, and you send them a hey, congratulations. It's pretty remarkable what you can do with this information, but they consider it benign, right? And literally, if you're a Duolingo user, go do it, right? Literally, it works. You can do it right now. And maybe on a more serious note, this is just from a few days ago. Hacktivist group hacked this red alert application. This is an app that is used widely in Israel. It alerts you to incoming attacks and rockets and missiles and so forth. And this hacktivist group discovered an API flaw and started flooding it with false alerts and really horrific messages, as you can see here. So it just goes to show that APIs can be breached in all kinds of different ways. And so how do we go about securing these things, right? So these are the 3 pillars. We've been talking about it on APISec University for a good long time, and it normally you try a model and it sort of works or it doesn't. This seems to really work, which is it's governance, it's testing, and it's monitoring, right? We really believe that you start with governance. I'm really glad I'm coming up after Arnaud's talk this morning. He knows way more about it than I do, but I think that's where you start. That's how you define your policies, your standards, how you're going to deploy and operate your APIs, the style guides, and so forth. And then we move into testing and monitoring. Governance, covered way better by Arnaud this morning. To me, it's really about policy and process on the right-hand side. Like, how do you do things? What does it look like? How do we do it in a standardized way? How do we avoid things like rogue and shadow APIs and all these crazy things? And then on the other side, it's awareness. Like, what do we have, right? What data is it accessing? Who has access to it? So that's the governance side. On the testing side, we're doing a pretty weak job of testing our APIs. This is from a survey run by Rapid API. Lots of functional testing, integration, acceptance, and way down the list, security, right? We tend to rely on once or twice a year pen tests, right? Manual efforts, right? Not really that good on APIs, and it's no surprise that things like Coinbase happened, and Duolingo, and Postal, and Venmo, and Instagram, and you name it. And what does testing really need to look like? It's way more than looking for injection attacks and cross-site scripting and all of these sort of plain vanilla type of security vulnerabilities, right? There's security aspect things, right? So looking for endpoints that have weak or broken or lacking authentication. looking at, are we using incremental IDs where we ought to be using something harder to guess? It is things like injections and fuzzings and all of that. And then you get into data type tests, right? Access controls. Who can access the information under what conditions? And then logic is probably the most important one, right? So logic vulnerabilities like Coinbase are your own personal 0 days, right? Like nobody's going to report those on a CVE. You're not getting an email that tells you you've got a vulnerability that's your vulnerability and no one else's. So we're seeing tons of this object ID manipulation, kind of like what we saw at Coinbase. It's #1 on the OWASP top 10 list, broken object level authorization. We see API function abuse, right? So at Bumble, I could change my account from free to paid, literally just by using this API and saying I'm a paid user now, right? Didn't have to pay a thing. I could make all of you paid customers through that function abuse. And authorization gaps, we see this all over the place. And then, on the monitoring side, really 3 aspects to monitoring that I see, right? There's the runtime protection. This is typically what you get from a gateway, right? So we're setting policies like geofencing or IP whitelisting or blacklisting, where we control authentication, who has access, we filter traffic. That's runtime protection. There's threat detection, right? So let's look for attacks as they're happening, like that Duolingo example. Like, how did that not get detected? That literally hundreds of millions of requests were happening, probably from a handful of IP addresses. So you want to be able to detect these types of threats, to do incident response, to understand what happened, so I can retrace the steps, make sure it doesn't happen again, and to verify that our controls are really working. Right? Like we often will run into clients where it's like, we have a WAF in place, right? Your volumetric attacks won't work, and then they work, right? And the reason why is somebody made a change and turned the WAF into alert mode or monitor mode and not into blocking mode. So you want to be able to make sure that your controls are actually working. And so I feel like if I'm going to stand up here and be a university, we ought to have a top 10 list. Everyone seems to have a top 10 list. So these are Dan's top 10 best practices for API security. So bear with me as we go through. Talked about it, start with governance. I think that's where you got to start, right? Like security teams want to jump right into let's fix it, right? Let's bolt on some security, let's buy some products, let's deploy stuff. But if you want a long-lasting, good results, benefits, I think you need to start with governance. You need to know your API ecosystem, right? All the stuff about like shadow and rogue APIs, to me, that's a governance problem. That's not a technology problem. I really like the folks at Kroger. So that's our largest grocery supermarket chain in the States. They have an incredibly mature API program. And I talked to the guys. I said, how did you get your arms around all these APIs, right? And what they did, and it segues into number 3, is we just went and talked to the dev teams, right? Security teams like to say, we don't know what APIs we got, right? We don't have a clue, right? Just because you don't know as a security person does not mean that the company doesn't know, right? So get talking to the dev teams. There's often way too much siloed departmentalism between security and dev. So some of the best practices that we've heard about are CISOs embedding security champions into the dev organization, right? That's a really effective way to formalize some integration, some collaboration, and really to discover and learn about what's going on. I don't know if Jason's in the room here, but from Stoplight, but documentation is non-negotiable. Anyone who tells me we have APIs without docs, that's a problem. Right? I don't know why you would develop an API without documentation. Presumably, you want someone to use your API. They need to know how it works. It also facilitates security, right? Security teams need that documentation to know what they're dealing with. Train API developers and owners on these types of things, right? A lot of times, our product teams are really good at making the thing do what it's supposed to do. But they're not great at making it not do what it's not supposed to do, right? And that comes from awareness, understanding, like really seeing these examples of how APIs get breached in the real world. Centralized API management, right? So there shouldn't be 100 different ways for APIs to get onto the network and into production. There should be one way or a few ways, right? People tell me, like, the idea of one centralized gateway is probably not realistic, but multiple, that's fine. Whatever works for you, but have a standard way that you manage and operate and deploy your APIs, right? Don't have these rogue systems where people can just put APIs onto the network. Don't trust anything. This is really about input validation more than anything, right? Like, even your own APIs, right? You need to assume that whatever's coming in is invalid until it matches what you're expecting. So, imagine you've got like a user account profile feature in your application, right? And the user, they put their name, hometown, email address, their LinkedIn profile URL, whatever it might be. Now that LinkedIn URL, right, if it doesn't look like a LinkedIn URL, you need to toss it, right? It could be an injection, it could be /etc password, it could be localhost users, who knows what, right? So don't trust anything, not even your own APIs, and definitely not third-party APIs. Don't rely on UIs for security, as I mentioned earlier, right? We're using UIs as part of our security infrastructure, but we know you can go right around it, and all that control goes right out with it. Authentication is not authorization. This is the most technical thing that I'm going to do here today. I figured out the % equals, so I feel pretty good about that, Travis. But there's so many examples where people think we're done. We did authentication. We're good, right? Take Peloton. Anyone use Peloton here in the room, right? I at least own one. I don't know if I use it, but I have one. And what happened there, right? Someone found an API wide open to the internet, no authentication. I could access all 4 million users' records, right? Even if you marked your account as private, you could still access it through the API, including folks like Joe Biden, right? So eventually, this person, they got notified it, and they fixed it. They added authentication in there. Okay, great. Next thing you know, you could just create an account, authenticate to the API, and still access all 4 million users, right? Authentication is not authorization. A lot of people think they're done with authentication. We know how hard that is. And then number 10, it's very close to, and near and dear to my heart, is automate pre-production testing, right? Doing a once or twice a year pen test manually, that probably barely touches your APIs, because let's face it, APIs are hard, right? It's a command line, right? There's no UI, there's no structure, there's no words on it, there's no buttons. Super hard, right? And you're putting a bunch of code out there that hasn't been tested, right? If you're releasing code every month, week, day, and you're doing a test every year, right? It's totally out of sync. So automate it, make it continuous, and make it part of your CI/CD pipeline. So just as I wrap up, a little bit about APISec University. So we have a lot of courses. It's all free, right? And extremely popular, right? We launched this 1 year ago. We have 60,000 users in the platform, 3/4 of the Fortune 100 enrolled. If you want to learn how to hack APIs, we got this pen testing exam pen testing course up there. It's really remarkable. It's 12 hours. You will learn how to build your own lab, use the tools, Burp, Zap, Postman, you name it. If you want to train your developers and API owners, I recommend the API Security Fundamentals. It's kind of like what this talk is, but more. A lot of organizations are making it mandatory for their developers and API product owners. We've got an OWASP deep dive. We've got, if you're subject to PCI, DSS 4.0 is all about APIs, and you have to comply by March next year. And then our good friend Jason Harmon, he created this API documentation best practice, really fantastic course. And that's it. If this was interesting, if you want to learn how to hack APIs, by all means, hit the QR code. We'll send you a copy of the book. My name's Dan. You can follow up with me, Dan at APISecUniversity.com, and hopefully we'll see some of you in our courses. Thanks very much.